Here. So today we are on the sixth chakra. We've done 5 of these so far. For anybody who isn't watching, we now have a little series that will be complete next month. And so today is the third eye chakra. And one question that I have. So I have, as some people on here may or may not know, I have a blog. And I publish something new every Wednesday on a website called creatorsofnewearth.com. And I have been doing a chakra series. So far I've written an introductory piece which explains what the subtle body channels are and what exactly a chakra is, and defining the torus field. And it's really designed like a free online course for beginners who want to learn about chakras.
Excellent.
And I offer them, like a toolkit in the form of links and whatnot. And I introduce some of the Sanskrit terms and some of the viewpoints from, traditional, looking through the traditional Ayurvedic lens. So in doing that, what I've noticed, and I noticed before that because you and I have talked about it, but okay, so in the traditional Ayurvedic, through the traditional Ayurvedic lens, they will say one thing. If you get on the internet and start looking around, you'll notice people will say different things about the locations or the associated everything. Like it's very differing. And one thing that working within the system that you and I have been talking about, one thing that differs greatly is the what are called koshas in Sanskrit, or the our 5 bodies, right? So we have a physical body and a mental body and an astral body, etc. And so in the traditional Ayurvedic, they would say that the root chakra is the physical, and the second chakra is the emotional body, and no, sorry, the astral body, interestingly enough. So anyways, without going into, chakra by chakra, I know that what you and I have talked about here has been a little bit different than that.
Sure.
I'm not bringing this up to correct it or make it wrong.
No.
I'm bringing it up to say, is this because of an evolution? Is it because of another layer? Is it because there's overlap? Is it because there's new information coming through at this time? Because I know when you built your own relationship with chakras, you use your pendulum and your mind to formulate questions and to connect with source, to connect with spirit, to get answers. And you've gotten answers that don't match up with the traditional Ayurvedic. And that's okay, because that pushes our boundaries and helps us to learn something new. So, do you know what the offhand? I'm discombobulated because I had a rough time getting on here today, everybody. But so we had talked about, for instance, the throat chakra being the mental body. And in Ayurveda, do you know which body they normally say the third eye is? Which layer, which kosha?
Yeah, it's interesting because like you said, this original structure is 5 chakras or koshas, right? So this is where, when I asked questions about that, I got that we did, as humans, have 5 chakras. So there may have been a point where we had 3, may have been a point where we had 1. And so I think that, when we tune into these writings, and then we kind of say, like, this chakra system is without the head. So that's kind of how I saw it when I was originally looking at the Tibetan information and saying, so it's like the trunk, basically. So the representation of the trunk, and then the head either was represented in another way, integrated in, so that, clearly we have a head and it has chakras. So I think it was also interesting when I was first studying toe reading as well, because 5 toes, 5 fingers, 5 toes, right? So there is some information that, that we actually had 6. So I don't know, maybe there was a point where we had 7 appendages. So, so this is essentially what we're understanding as now the 6th chakra. And of course, in this teaching from these guides, specifically Gabriel, um, this 6th chakra is called the subtle body. So that's, like you said earlier, like the subtle. So it's representative of subtleness, and it's representative of the upper 3 chakras. So in this system, heart center, upper 3, lower 3 feminine, upper 3 masculine. Now, again, we kind of break stuff down as everything is masculine and feminine. So it's not just, it is represented as the upper and lower in that way. And so now we're saying, okay, how does that kind of fit together with subtle, which would be the whole system? So this whole toroidal field. And then we're looking at that as, okay, basically when we're teaching this information, we just want the simplest version, so that, this is the subtle, it's representative of subtle. As we move into the crown, we're going to talk about astral. And there's a lot of, conversations about what astral energy is and how that might be the pinnacle of our connectivity to source. And then we think about it in this terms, as we've been going through these chakras, as each one of these is paired. And so now we're looking at the pair of 6th and 2nd chakra. And now we start to kind of take that into account. Like the 2nd chakra in this guidance is the physical body. And now we're talking about a subtle version of that. So a more subtle version of the physical body. So that would be these kind of layers that we think about as octaves. And so, right. And so this is where, like, the liver has a whole bunch of octaves, has a very gross physical, and then it goes out into the subtle. So subtle being the opposite of gross. And, physical body, it can be gross. And so we'll put a little humor in there and say,
and gross and subtle being like the densest to the least dense, right?
Absolutely, definitely.
You might not know.
Absolutely, yeah.
Don't want people to think that gross just means icky.
Right, exactly. So yeah, so basically then we can get a handle on subtle a little better, that it is maybe a different frequency or octaves, as I'm talking about, of light or sound, and how these things are both light and sound, these chakras. And now we can kind of get that pairing, and that's how I kind of put it together, is now it feels like this is the physical 2nd chakra and the subtle 6th. So that's kind of how we look at it.
Okay. And then the 2 petals, they say, are representing the Ida and Pingala, which are the subtle body channels that run along the right and left side of the spine, also masculine and feminine.
Absolutely.
And that they're saying that at the 6th eye, the Ida and the Pingala converge with the what's called in Ayurveda the Sushumna, which is the central body channel.
Yep.
So they're saying that this is the convergence of the central body channel and the Ida and Pingala, or subtle body channels that run along the spine. So those 3 channels, the central channel and the right and left channel, all converge. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think that this is, that's where a lot of practices will, like on the basic level, we're thinking that all energy is coming through the crown and coming, so it's coming into that central channel and then separating into these separate channels, going down through the chakra system and coming back up. So it comes down and goes back up, or it comes down and goes back up. There's different ways of essentially understanding that. But what we're doing here is we're essentially saying that energy is coming through the root and through the crown. And so now that gives more credence to those 2 channels as well. Right? So that there's these 2 channels and they move different directions. And so that energy is constantly doing this. and moving out from the heart. In, out, in, out. And so that gives a kind of a breakdown into that too. So we don't, like I'm always teaching in this way of, we want to simplify it, central channel. And we want to expand that once you have that concept to two energy channels coming in to the heart and going out from the heart. And so that's essentially this way that we breathe. And a lot of the pranayama is designed that way. And so it is designed in the way of I'm breathing in this upper and lower energy and breathing it back out.
And also in more traditional terms, the Sanskrit terms or the Ayurvedic terms would be, you're breathing in. I'm not saying this for you, Kevin. I know you know it. I'm saying it for the audience.
Absolutely.
You're breathing in the Shakti energy, or the energy that is more tied with the earth and with matter. And then you're breathing in the non-dual or everything or source energy, or what's called Shiva energy. So you're breathing in through the central channel, you're breathing in the Shiva and Shakti energies which meet at the heart, right?
Correct.
And they go like this,
Yes.
and they circulate throughout your body, throughout your subtle body channels, and throughout your toroidal field. So this is how we're tying it all together. So the two petals do represent Shiva and Shakti, just as they represent the Ida and Pingala, and then they also represent where the central channel and the Ida and Pingala meet.
Absolutely.
Just to tie it all together.
Oh, I think no, it's really important. I think as we're diving into this, to we're up in these upper chakras now, and so we really want to kind of engage this mental body that we engaged last time, and now this subtle body, this mind that we're thinking of as mind. So this upper mind connected to this lower body. So the mind body connection as well. So lots of different terms, and I'm always doing this in all the teachings that I do. I'm trying to clarify terminology and simplify it in a way that can be used. So like I'm meditating and I'm visualizing this. And now I'm understanding that's masculine and feminine. And I'm understanding that comes together in all the chakras, in every chakra, but in the heart as the way that it then pools. I call it pooling into the heart, and then out back into the oneness, through the metaphysical realms and into the oneness. And so kind of creating that, understanding too, that there is a body and a soul and a spirit. And those are the names that we use essentially to identify this gross physical body, the soul, which is more of a subtle, right, or metaphysical body, and then the spirit, which is the oneness, the non-dual, or a better way of understanding non-dual, the everything. So everything in one place in a perfect balance. And so that we can draw upon that to create duality.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to think about, because I think we can walk around with the concept, or maybe we have been our whole lives, of the non-dual as emptiness and therefore nothingness,
Exactly.
rather than the everything, right?
Yes.
So if it's the everything, but it's also emptiness, you could also consider it as the when I think of the everything and I think of emptiness and I think of non-duality, I think of that first emergence or first emanation of something that is on its way to becoming gross and on its way to becoming matter, without all the density. So without all the labels and the definition and the individuation and everything, but it's still part of the everything. It doesn't mean it's nothing. And that's a very important distinction.
Absolutely. No, I think that's, a lot of the work that I've done where, these things just kind of come along like, well, everything is represented in this physical world that is the metaphysical and also spiritual. And so that's where do we see something coming from nothing? And then we can kind of put it in the context of, like I kind of pushing forward this idea of just using the word create or creating as opposed to manifesting. And
Mhm.
so, right, just really focusing in on this word that we already associate with bringing something into matter or form, created. And so then we look at that and we say, so is a child created from nothingness? And it's not. So just from what I see, and I say, that's not true, because we see the thingness of it. And so we can see that things come from things. And so then we're just saying that the spirit realm is the balanced of those polarities. And then from that comes polarity, and we can create the imbalance. And that's, I think, we're certainly experiencing that in the life that we're currently living. so
Mhm.
so it's like this is also representative of why pay attention to chakras, because they're about balance, because they're about achieving balance within each one of them and within all of them. And
Mhm.
so that is the work. So when somebody says I'm on my path or I'm doing my work, that's the work of being a human being, is really understanding that, really saying that what I'm doing is bringing my chakra system into balance individually and as a whole, so that I become that thing that's behind you there, that flower of life. As I do identify as the flower of life. So I do have that bias, that this structure that, that is
Mhm.
there, is the structure, is the building block. And so, but we also have a duality about that. We had a little message about that earlier where it was like, what do you think? This could be the
Mhm.
daisy of death, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, right here again, the polarity. So it's like, oh, it's this multidimensional thing, or it's, hmm, so again, it's a big conversation, but it's saying we are multidimensional beings, and knowing that is the first step. And then this sixth chakra is really important, because it is that way of saying, this is how I tie my subtle body to my physical body. And it has lots of different really physical things to talk about as far as what it's linked to. When we say that each one of these chakras is linked to an endocrine gland, so into our actual endocrine system where these hormones are produced and distributed. And so that's where we can give meaning to it as well as we're going through this process. It's like they're not just balls of light, they do something, and they translate energy. And so that's essentially what we're talking about here.
Um, so the sixth chakra, I think most people tend to associate it with the pituitary gland. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, there is, again, like you said, there is an Ayurvedic way of understanding this, Vedic, connected to the pineal. And so, I mean, there's a confusion basically because these two things really are central in the head. And so when we found out scientifically that the pineal's photoreceptors are on the top, so they're actually gaining light through the crown. Now that really changes the dynamic that we're translating light through the third eye into that pineal. And so now we're saying that we're gathering light through the crown into the pineal. And then that second landing place is in the pituitary, where all of this chemistry, just a ton of chemistry, is coming from. And so this master, pituitary, which I think, just from my understanding of medicine, which is very small, there really isn't a whole lot of energy placed there. It's like I don't go to the doctor and say I think I got something going on with my pituitary, right? Unless it's really obvious, unless there's a tumor or something that's really major medically, we're not really paying a lot of attention to that. Yet all of this chemistry comes from there. It runs the thyroid, it goes all the way through the system. It's telling the kidneys what to do. It is doing a lot. And I noticed in my work individually, it's a central focal point when I'm looking at what's going on with people physically. Looking at the pituitary and seeing its functioning is a really important process to see what's working and what isn't. What are the chemicals that are getting delivered? What aren't? How is that relating to symptoms that people are having? So it is a big deal.
Do the well, I won't go into that. That's too complex. I was going to ask about the pituitary and its relationship to the adrenals, but we won't go there. Um,
But it definitely is, right? I
makes me
mean,
think it's important.
aldosterone, looking at a lot of these things, prolactin, oxytocin is a good one to kind of tap into as far
Yeah.
as connectivity. That's really an important one as far as the third eye and how we think about this energetic light coming through and how that is activating a pineal, which is creating a master chemistry, and that chemistry then is speaking to, and we're talking about pituitary, but it's hooked into hippocampus, right? It's hooked into this whole dynamic of how we process energy. A lot of post-traumatic stress is happening within that amygdala when we think of, how is that energy being delivered. A lot of these disease processes have to do with the kidneys and the liver. So these chemicals that are basically, vasopressin is another one that, that's really critically important, the follicle generating hormone, right? So, right. So it's like, you have something like this, male pattern baldness, and it's just, you have male pattern baldness. Instead of saying there's something going on with the actual hormone that makes follicles work, and why don't they all of a sudden work in this very specific pattern on the crown of my head? It's another very interesting dynamic of this happens early in my life. And what does that have to do with how my pituitary works? Because I have definitely in my life seen how critically important that functioning is to a whole bunch of other functions. That if we could have looked at that and said, male pattern baldness, that has to do with this. And if we start working on your pituitary, we can definitely, I would be much farther along in this process if that would have been something that was offered to me when I was 18 years old. Like, it's not just this family genetic scenario. It is environment, it is chemical sensitivity, it is, as we've talked about many times, fungal load and bacteria and how those things work together and how they impact this production. And so, yeah, so I mean, I definitely think that, there's way, as each one of these chakras, we've said, we can go deep
Yeah.
dive into each one of them, but
Yeah.
just that understanding that this pituitary is a really important thing. And so,
Is the pineal gland, which we're associating with the crown chakra, which
mhm,
most people associate with the sixth chakra, but
yeah,
is it like you could say like a light that shines on the pituitary, and so it's
mm,
giving information to the
totally.
pituitary, and how well that pituitary is functioning,
Hmm.
it informs how that information gets translated,
Definitely, yeah,
or
because
if the
what's
message even reaches.
absolutely right, because this is where we're saying, are we exposed to light? So again, like we talk about being exposed to starlight, it's a very different quality of other stars that have burned out and coming our direction. There's information in that light, and we have a definite scientific definition of that, right? So that light contains information. So that's when we say, are we getting enough sunlight on this crown? Are we actually translating enough light? And I do both. I'll do this sun exposure, but I'll also imagine it. So I will just put into my imagination the light that then comes into the physical body. And as it enters into the physical body, I feel as though it translates into this feeling of liquid, because the body is a lot of liquid. And so here we are again talking about a substance, liquid, that translates information. And so here we're talking about, okay, now that it's coming in as light and now it's translating into liquid, that would be hormonal, that would be all the different, liquids that run through this body. And they have information that then informs this secondary brain structure. And that, that endocrine system essentially then begins to send its messages. And does it have the energy to do that? And so that's another investigation I've been doing a lot of is nervous system, right? Central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, and how we have symptoms that are way down the chain of nerve damage that show up finally as a disease process, but they start as nerve damage from toxicity, from this complicated world we live in, from the emotional impact that has on stress and post-traumatic stress. So it's, that's for taking it back upstream to this is where the information comes in, but how is it delivered? Can it be delivered? Do you have enough hydration? Do you have enough salt, basically, and hydration to deliver those messages effectively?
Yeah, and minerals.
Absolutely, right? So this cascade of minerals, this cascade of, right, we're talking about peptides. That's a big conversation right now with a lot of people. And, but that sounds really interesting until you're like, that's basically upstream from like the HGH, so now we're using an HGH peptide when in fact we use HGH. This is a big deal, the growth hormone and how that basically can affect the weight that a physical body has. So, I mean, these are I can get me started, right? But, but it's again, one of these things that's just like, yes, I get that peptide is part of the building block. And now we're using that. Now people are saying, oh, you've got this substance that has peptide in it that I can inject and I lose 15 pounds. And so, which is pretty true. I do think that is actually provable. And is that healthy? Well, as we typically find out, when we intervene in something and overpower it with some other substance, it throws something else out of balance.
It creates a different imbalance. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, okay, so here we are.
Yeah.
Sixth chakra, third eye, pituitary gland, and the Taoists called hormones, which that's what our endocrine glands excrete. They called those spirit molecules, and it sure makes sense because you have the right amount of something, or too much of something, or not enough of something. It will directly affect your state of mind, your mood, your body chemistry. So these endocrine glands, so at the chakras, everybody, in case you didn't know, at each of these 7 points along our spine, there is a place where the subtle body channels meet, and that usually corresponds to how many petals on the lotus. But there's not just the subtle body channels, there's also a nerve plexus, and that nerve plexus connects to the corresponding endocrine gland. So yeah, it can get very complex. So, and then Kevin, you and I had more of a private conversation, but I think important to touch on here too. In the traditional Ayurvedic way of looking at the chakras, they do say that there's something to do with the second chakra and intuition, but the whole world and pop culture seems to more place intuition here. So it's not to say it's just one or the other, but it's both. And if these are connected, the second and the sixth, 2 and 6 is 8, heart chakra, right? We've showed
Absolutely.
you can add 1 and 7, 2 and 6, 3 and 5, and they all equal 8 because they meet at the heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to distinguish or notice when an intuition of mine is coming more from my third eye, or when it might be coming more from my chakra. And not that we have to distinguish, but I think it's important at least to address that not all of our intuition is coming from here. Some of it is, a lot of it is coming from our second chakra. And the second chakra is also associated with water element.
Absolutely.
Right? And we can tend to make that association of emotions and water. And sometimes our intuition does have a very emotional component to it. It's like, oh, don't do that. Like, in the car and go to the grocery store right now, and it pings this little bit of fear in you that's meant to save you. So you listen to your intuition and be like, oh, I'm not supposed to go to the grocery store right now.
Exactly.
And
yes.
So how to distinguish or how to make that connection, or
I think it's great, right? I mean, I think that what you just said about these relatively mundane or simple messages, like don't go to the store, or you're returning from the store and you hear something say stop longer at this light, or turn left. Or lots of us understand that we have those intuitions, those voices that are coming from the metaphysical realm, entering into this physicality. And then the practice basically of that is really important. This practice of, you know, use it more, use and pay attention to this process that's going on, not just I've got to get to the store right now, this is what I'm doing today. And right, so, and then crash and burn and all these things that, you know, I have that direct experience. And so it's like, don't go to Home Depot. And I do, and I lose a career basically. And so, right, so it's a big deal. It's like, you know, these things are very small decisions that can be really big. And when we put it back into that context and say, yeah, it seems mundane, but really, what is mundane? You know, this is a very living organism that we live in, and we live in this very alive universe. And so that's what we're saying is, like, you know, what I wrote down here, just this couple of notes, like, listen, don't argue with it. You know, oh, this is just my own inner voice saying this, right? So argue less. Maybe don't is a big statement, but argue less with that messaging. Have a way to question it. Like, I have a pendulum in cards, and think, you know, things like, what do I do today? You know, this is what's the most important thing to do today. And oftentimes when I ask that question, I get an answer that isn't in alignment with me as a
What
physical
you
person.
wanted to do.
Exactly, right? So I want to do this, this, and this, and I get the answer, sleep for an hour in the afternoon. And so it's like, all right, but I got all this stuff to do. Then I get the stuff done because I got that additional rest.
Yeah.
And so it's really important. And then, you know, that, you know, this is one of the statements of, you can't make this stuff up, right? So it's like, when you do listen and then you find out, you get evidence in some other synchronistic way that that was the right answer,
Yeah.
then, you know, you really have to come back into yourself and say, practicing this is the most important way of understanding the system and understanding how they're connecting.
Yeah.
And
Unfortunately, I mean, for me, a large part of the way that I learned to listen to my intuition was because of all the high prices I paid by not listening.
mhm,
So
yes,
I would have a message, I would not listen to it.
mhm,
Something terrible would happen that would
yeah,
cause me either, you know, a dent in my pocketbook, a dent in my body,
yeah,
um,
hmm,
some dramatic situation, something that took a lot of energy to clean up and reconcile and, you know,
absolutely,
back into balance or heal. And so I finally just came up with this saying that says, if you hear a voice that's telling you to do something or not do something, and it does not make sense, listen to it.
yeah,
And here's why. Because if it doesn't make sense, it's because it's not coming from the what you think of as mind. It's not
perfect,
coming from the intellect. It's not
hmm,
coming from, you know, knowledge. It's coming from your inner gnosis.
yeah,
It's coming from your subtle mind. It's coming
hmm,
from the part of you that is connected to everything and knows all things, right? You know
absolutely,
past, present, and future at the same time. And your future
exactly,
self already knows if
hmm,
you do this, this is the result because we've been there. So, like, let's change the story. Let's not go there. You know, so it's broad and vast and trippy to think about and cool to think about, but man, you don't listen and you pay some heavy prices. So I
hmm,
think it's a good message. Like, just listen. If you're sitting at a stoplight and you're about to go right, and your mind tells you turn left, turn left. There's
hmm,
a reason, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And it's really, really critically important. And I think that's probably the most important message here, is that this system works, and that we tend to override it with just one system, either my emotions or my beliefs. Doesn't match up with my beliefs, doesn't match up with my emotions. And so, say this thing to this person, right? Lots of books and movies and messages that are kind of based on that too. Like, use that process of me being more connected. And so I say, you know, Gabriel just told me to do this, and so I'm going to do it, and then it works. So the evidence is really important too. And that's faith. Like that's my definition of faith in that second chakra is I ask for help. I get the help. I recognize it is coming not just from me, but it's coming from this metaphysical source, angels, guides, helpers, all this plethora. And I recognize it in that way. And that builds faith. And that's why we have that in that second chakra as the grace, because faith built, not just I have faith and the Africa exists, even though I haven't been there, right? It's that I have evidence that when I ask, it is answered. And when it's answered, I have more faith. And what does that do? That moves into the patience of that third eye. That's the grace of this third eye, sixth chakra, is patience, but not the patience that we think in humanity, right? So I'm just going to patiently wait for something to happen. I did my part. So basically, that's what the faith part is. I gave it over to this metaphysical realm, and they're doing something. Maybe billions of things, could be trillions. I don't know. It's a lot. And so, like you said, the things that we can't conceptualize with this brain that we have. And that's my patience is I patiently wait for the next sign. And when I get that next sign, then I take my next action. And so this combination of faith and patience, I ask for help from the metaphysical realm. I get that help. I build faith. I move that up into my third eye and say, maybe they tell me who's doing it. Maybe it's Gabriel, maybe it's Uriel, maybe it's Raphael, maybe it's right. So them using angel names here, but maybe it's bear medicine, and then it works. And so that's them basically saying, we need you to have this acceptance, because that's essentially what we're talking about with patience, is the ability to accept what is happening, to acknowledge that this is what's happening now, and to be with it enough, patient enough for the next thing to occur, and then act
Mm,
on that.
mm,
So that's basically this kind of practicality of what is this space between my eyebrows. It is, and we also talk about the opposing force to that, the attachment or the lust. So it's a big trigger word, right? It's got a lot of connotation to it, but in this context, it's just attachment. If I am pursuing something without waiting, without having that spirit guide patience, and I'm continuing to pursue and to do and to do, that's another way that you can kind of run into life, and it can push back physically, metaphysically, right? Emotionally, stress. A lot of our stress is that.
but it's also, I've noticed it's also the spirit tells you to do something and you don't do it. And I'm not talking about like an accident. I'm talking about spirit gave you a project. Like
Yeah.
spirit wants you to start getting on YouTube and talking, or spirit
Hmm.
wants you
Yeah.
to become an intuitive guide, or spirit wants you
Hmm.
to, and then you don't listen to that, your life also gets messed up.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really interesting because if you're not doing a practice, then it may be hard to notice that. And so, but if you're doing a meditation practice, you're doing something where you're practicing awareness in some way, then you can see what you're talking about, where it's like each day that I don't do that thing, what does transpire? And it's very real, it's very physical. And it's like you're saying, I'm being guided to be the teacher. And it takes a while for my fear to catch up with me to get me out there into the world. And so there's lots of things that occur and don't occur. Right. So it's like you can have what you need, resources, right? Money, time, connection to people. And this is really the guidance that we're giving here is that when you practice and you have that awareness, you can see that's not happening. So I need this resource for this to be able to occur, and it's not showing up.
Mhm.
And so I can call out to the guides in some sort of happy and or frustrated way and say, why aren't you doing this? And you just hear this simple message back. We need you to do this. Call this person, do this video, right? Just do the next thing. Just take
Yeah.
the next step. and we will take our next step. But we can't do that if you're out of step.
Yeah. I wasn't as refined then as I am now. And when I say then, I'm talking about when my relationship to acupuncture was changing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this to talk about me. I'm saying this as an example for the audience. So here's an example. So we're talking about how when you don't listen to spirit, what happens? Well, I was practicing acupuncture for about 12 years, and then I was trying different things like practicing out of my home, working for other people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the doors to the acupuncture world kept closing. And I took it as a personal affront, like I'm doing something wrong, spirit's not supporting me, spirit's not on my side. If I were as in tune as I am now, I could have heard that spirit was also saying, we need you to do this. And as a matter of fact, right before I quit at Blue Lotus, when I was working for Carrie Lynn, she said, you've done great work here. And, there's nothing wrong with you or the way you practice or anything, but I can just see that your enthusiasm or something has waned, like something isn't a match anymore. And she said, and that's not bad. She said, I think what it is you're being asked to go within and say, what is that thing? What is that thing that lights you up? And then go do that, and it took a while to find that. And I actually have a new mission that spirit has given me that I've been told from friends in the past was going to come at some point in my life. And now you and I together have worked out that the guidance is to go forth and do some intuitive guide work. And I don't doubt it at all. And it's not like on the table yet. It's like nobody, my shingle's not up. People don't have a phone number that they can call or anything like that. And I'm in conversation with spirit about it right now, not because I'm dragging my heels, but because I'm trying to listen to the emergence, like how does it come forth? What is the name? What is the concept? How do I put myself out there? What is the best way to go? And so it's a little fetus right now, and I know that if I don't do it, it's not going to be pretty. So whether I want to or not, I kind of have to. But I'm excited. I mean, I don't want to say that like, oh, I don't want to do it, but I'm just doing it because I have to. It's like, well, no. It's like no matter how much trepidation or doubt or whatever, I know that I have to do it because the things that have been difficult before, like studying acupuncture, for example, brought great rewards. So how that ties into the third eye, I don't. The patience, we talk about this as being, the mental body. We talk about the throat and how we speak, but the third chakra is also a lot about listening. Are we actually listening to ourselves, to other people when they speak, to life, to the messages? But I think there's a component of listening too with this, even though we call it the third eye. It's like, how do you hear with your third eye? The patience, that's a component of the patience too.
Absolutely. No, this is an excellent point, right? I mean, you do kind of prefer vision, even in a lot of sense experience. We kind of prefer seeing things. A lot of people will say, I need to see it before I believe it. And so, that's another component of faith. And so, like this, bringing this awareness to light with information in, listening to the information and delivering that information out. And so that's definitely what we're talking about here. The sense experience is directly tied to these chakras that we're talking about, and how each one of them, that's when we get into the microcosm of the microcosm. So when we're saying big second and sixth, but they're all interwoven. Every chakra is interwoven with itself. And so they're all giving feedback in and out, in and out, in and out. And so that as you get more in, like people will say, and I think we mentioned this here a few times, well, isn't there 1,200 chakras? You start with, isn't there 12? Isn't there 1,500? Is there 3,000? I mean, there's a drawing basically in, I don't even remember where I saw it, right? But it's like there are thousands and thousands of chakras. And so we don't want to blow your mind with all of that information, but there really is. I mean, every one of these joints is an energy portal. Every one of these things that we're dealing with in this physical body that we can see, and how we're interrelating this bubble, that flower of life, and we're bumping into each other's chakras. That's why that 6 feet is a really important, right? Denotation. We get within 6 feet of somebody, we're in their chakra system. And so, and vice versa. And so basically that's also a responsibility when you're out and about, to understand that you're tuned in to somebody else and how many people are in their chakras. So it's, again, and they told 2 people and they told 2 people, right? So it definitely kind of just expands very quickly. And so that's what we want to do here too, is just bring some simplicity of how do you listen? What are the practices, right? And there's many, many practices. And just to be able to close the eyes, sort of pull the vision back and extend the vision, right? So the imagination. This is, we're talking again about these 2 hemispheres of the brain, that there is this hemisphere that we over rely on, this mental hemisphere where things are this default mode network, this place where we know that we're a physical body sitting in a chair. And then this experiential network as well, right? So this experiential brain, that's what we're talking about here, is practice the experiential brain more. And that is this process of intuition. And so a lot of people will say, I think I'm intuitive, or I think I'm empathic, right? So I think these words then we can kind of bring back into, I'm empathic. I basically can feel other people's emotions, where we take that empathy and sympathy and kind of pull those apart. Like, I have a general mental construct that people are emotional. Sympathy. So, and then I have this actual feeling of what they're feeling. So it's a really important thing to build. Some people are naturally that, past lives, all the things that we talk about, right? But we can build that. These are all muscles that we can build, and intuition is definitely one of those. And it's really, I think, critical for our human life and how we thrive in this human life instead of just existing.
I was thinking the other day about COVID and how it really hit the first and second chakra. And I want to tie this into faith too, also to
Yeah.
the 6th chakra. But so, the sense of smell is connected to the root chakra, and the sense of taste is connected to the 2nd chakra. And our basic survival instinct is the 1st chakra.
Yeah.
And then, the 2nd chakra, our way of like, how do we express ourselves creatively and put ourselves out in the world, and related to our procreative organs too. I mean, there's a lot to be said for, and our emotions. It's they're both really loaded. But my point is that, isn't it interesting that so many people lost their sense of taste and smell during COVID, and how hard hit our 2nd chakras got? And then there's the other thing of the people who were like, I'm not really presencing or intuiting that everything that's being told to me on the internet and the news is correct. Like, I just smell a rat, or I don't feel like it's safe for me to take the medicine that everybody else is taking in their arm. And those people were scapegoated for
Absolutely. Yes, definitely.
because it's like, oh, you're killing people and you're the reason that society has this disease, and you're just perpetuating the disease, and you're like, we were made to feel bad for listening to our 2nd and 6th chakra, our intuition. I mean, we
Mhm.
were feeling this in our reproductive organs.
Yes.
No, 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 you
Mhm.
know? And
Absolutely.
everybody else was like, bad, bad, you're bad, you're the reason why. Even on the news, they were saying
Yeah. Mhm.
it was like a what's that phenomena? The Operation Mockingbird,
Mhm.
where you can even see videos where everybody's saying, they're the reason you're not safe. They're the reason you're not safe. They were instilling into
Yes.
people that
Yes.
people who were not getting the vaccines were really the bad guys.
Mhm.
And so I'm tying this up to say that those of us who did listen to our intuition, some people's intuition was to get it and it worked for their body. Some people
Mhm.
uh, didn't get it, and we're really happy because we've seen to what it's done to some people's bodies. My
Mhm.
point is, we stuck with our faith and our
Right.
intuition, and it worked for us.
Mhm.
And when you got 20% or less of the population of 8 billion people doing that, and you're
Yes.
being told you're a bad guy, you
Right.
know,
Yeah. Totally.
and then 2 years down the road, you're like, oh, my friend got, the vax and 2 boosters, and they've had COVID 3 times or whatever. And
Mhm.
you're like, man, I'm so glad that I listened to my intuition. I'm so glad I had faith in myself. I'm so glad I had
Absolutely.
patience to listen. I'm so glad I had
Mhm.
confidence, and so it just shows you where these are all tied together, because it's like people, their first and second chakra get engaged, that fear, that survival
Mhm.
instinct, and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to do the first thing I can that anybody's telling me to save my life. Oh, it's the jab, I'm going to get it. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, it's so convincing because those chakras are so activated and people just want to feel safe, you know
Absolutely. Yes.
but I think that's a good example of where that all interacts and
Mhm.
interplays. It's many chakras dealing with each other at once, and yeah. Anyway,
Absolutely. No, I think it's an excellent point. We're just from the standpoint that it's very present, right? We're just really, coming out of this intensity and using that media, right? So here's this media that is evolved relatively quickly from the response of there is a collective media that is giving a very specific message. And is that message matching with what your intuition is? And so this is where, this kind of media is becomes so much more important. This gets this voice out into a bigger population of people to say, and what are we saying? We don't have to lock into the polarity of one or the other. We just have to lock into what is right for you,
you,
right? And what is, this is the message that I was putting out pretty strongly was we are creators, right? Here we are on this podcast, right? So here we are, creators of what, right? A way of understanding that our intentionality trumps everything else.
yes,
Word used on purpose, right? So this is essentially where that messaging of fear can be intervened with. And what is the intervention? Our intention. What do I want? Health. That's safety. What does that, how can I do that, right? There's a lot of personal decisions I need to make that are healthy. If I'm on the path of making unhealthy choices, then it's likely that I'm listening to somebody else, that I'm listening to another message that says, eat this and drink this and do this, right? That's my whole work, is asking questions, going against the assumptions, going against the assumptive energy of this is how this works. I put out in all of my sessions this one basic construct, and we'll put it out here too. Virus has unfettered access to your cellular structure. That would be a really bad plan. That would be a bad creation plan. So much virus that has unfettered access to changing your health. Just a thought. We'll put that into the zeitgeist here and say, what might it be? I'm a big advocate of basically this thing that is a combination of fungus and bacteria
and
and
viruses.
and viruses, right? And so, right, so this is my message, and I use this message a lot in my personal work. Think about that concept. We're using virus to get stuff into a cell. That means it has unfettered access. That means it replicates fast. That means that it would be unlikely that that's actually the thing that's causing the problem. That would be a bad structure from the beginning of our, genetic makeup, that we would just let unfettered. I mean, cells have layers and layers of protection. For what? so that's just a really simple message. And the other one basically is about immunity. Immunity is love. And I really have a strong desire to put that out into the world. Immunity is not fighting anything. There is no fighting. There is only encompassing things in love. If it's out of balance, bring it into love. That's what we're doing here. We take this polarity and we bring it back into this heart, into this compassionate center, and bring these messages back into love, neutral energy, not polarized. And this is essentially my message out to the world, is that if you think of your immune system as love, and if it is impeded, then there's not enough love. So what do we need? That's what we need injected is love. More health, more balance. That's really the strong message that I want to put out into the world. That when we love ourselves and others in a compassionate and kind way, we are healthy, we are safe, and we are free. And those are the two dynamics of the masculine and feminine, the safety and the freedom. And that's what we're doing here, is we're just working towards the center place and working towards that. I get stronger messages when I'm here than when I'm here. Yeah. When I am fully attached or when I'm fully detached. That's another powerful message of this, is that way out in the spectrum here, light, dark, full attachment, full detachment. Where do we want to move? Here. A little bit of attention. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I want to add to that, if I may.
Yeah, please.
There's a few misconceptions, I think, about, there's plenty of misconceptions about love and also about neutrality. Mm-hmm. And I think when people really start to access the frequency and the vibration and the energy of love, mm-hmm. they realize that no, it's not about emotion. Exactly. It might be about some ineffable thing that you feel that's not really a feeling and not really an emotion. Exactly. But it's actually neutral. Yeah. And when I think of neutral, I go back to that non-duality, which is not nothing, it's the everything.
Yeah, everything.
And yes. Not only that, but neutral, the other misconception is that neutral means detached.
Correct.
And there's this big thing about, oh no, you don't want to be totally detached, because then that means you don't love that person or something. And it's like, no, again, polarity. This is attachment. This is detachment. This is neutral. We talk about that 3% on either side.
Yeah.
And we think about emotions. Emotions definitely have a charge. We associate love with an emotion. So no, neutral is not full on detachment, and it's not this passionate big emotion either. It's neutral. It's the place where all things are held. It's the place where non-duality lives, the everythingness, the unity consciousness.
Absolutely.
And it's the fulcrum. It's the epitome of balance, actually.
Yeah.
So I hope that clarified. If anybody had any misconceptions, I hope that clarified.
Oh, I think that's excellent too, because we use the word love, right? And this English language has one word, whereas the Romance language, it's like 10, 15 different words that mean love. And they do mean different aspects of it. And so they mean these aspects of spirituality, connection, surrender to source, this thing that is the everything, and how we apply that in our lives. And I think that's definitely a confusion, that love is an emotion. And so when we clarify emotion as anger, sadness, and fear, which one is it? Right? Because if you're in a romantic relationship, you have all three of those. So it might be a connection of all three of those: anger, sadness, and fear. But it isn't separate from that. It is its own entity that always exists and is the only thing that's true.
Yeah. And love is also confused for detachment. I mean,
Yeah.
attachment, right?
Codependency, right? Totally.
Like
Absolutely.
people have this
Yeah.
feeling of attachment and they're like, oh, that's love, you know, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, or like, if you love me, you'll do this thing for me, like a reason to manipulate somebody. And it's like, well,
Absolutely.
you know, or I'm attached to you, so you're not allowed to do that, because then that would put me in fear, anger, sadness, and all those things. So you got to act like I'm telling you to act because
Exactly.
we're in love, and so we do things for each other. And it's like, that is so the antithesis of love.
Absolutely. It really is. And I think that this conversation is so important, right? Because it is, just getting our definitions right. And we can use the word, because is there a word for the thing that I'm talking about? Well, according to spiritual teachings from the beginning of time, there isn't a name for it. There isn't a word, because it's non-dual. And so it doesn't have an identification as either masculine or feminine or safe or free, or right, all of these things that we're talking about. So it is the thing that everything is built on. And that is a critical component to relationship, but that is the thing that keeps things working. I tell people all the time, when they're ending a relationship, the goal of ending a relationship is in love. That's the best case scenario, because that is the place, that is this neutral, that is this completeness. And so that's another way of thinking of it, that, it's hard to think I'm going to end a relationship because I'm in love. But it really does make sense when we think of the attached codependencies and how we have to reduce all of those attachments basically to get to this place. So, yeah. So, I mean, the conversation is really important, and it's really, just to kind of take this in as a listener, if these are really new concepts to you, put them in your practice. Say, I haven't used love in that way before, but let me sit with that. Let me sit down for 10 or 15 minutes and just think about that. Just contemplate what we're trying to say here.
Kevin, can you explain about this a little bit more as the only person on the screen? And then when I come back, I would like to share the experience that you walked Alfonso and I through.
Oh, yeah,
That
definitely.
has to do
Absolutely.
with ending a relationship in love.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to go solo for a second, Kevin.
All right. I can do it. Welcome. So we'll readjust just a little bit here. So basically what we're talking about, we're talking about the sixth chakra. We're led into a conversation about love and about the neutrality of that. And so it's really important to just kind of touch into what's neutral for you. And then what we're talking about basically of attachment and detachment, and how this place that's closer into the center, and again, not necessarily a fulcrum point of the same, but something that isn't that. So that's another way to kind of think about this. So love basically is the platform. It's this stuff that we're swimming in. You could even maybe think of it as gravity. What do we understand gravity to be? It's holding us on the planet. It's holding planets from crashing into each other. This is a force that we can then kind of translate into this understanding in this word love, where love is the only thing that exists. It does not have a polarity. It is neutral. And that basically is the everything, as we've talked about. And these are big concepts. So these are simple words that I'm saying, but they're big concepts. And so just allow yourself to relax into that place, that there's a platform of non-dual, of everythingness, where duality comes forth. And that would be the attachment and the detachment. And then we're also saying detached, right? Also not helpful. And so then the level of attachment. So here we go from these really extreme versions where you may have experienced this in your own relationship, where it gets super polarized, where one person is very attached and the other one is very detached, right? In psychotherapy terminology, that would be super codependent and very independent. And so then where does the dependence fall? It just basically goes away. And now we have this very codependent stance and very independent stance. And sometimes we have two codependent stances, right? So that definition of codependence is really important too, where we're talking second chakra and sixth chakra. And basically, what is codependence? Codependence is fear. Fear, basically, again, it's really tricky to call it an emotion. We do, but when we really get into it, fear is just awareness. It's just a greater level of awareness and my discomfort with that awareness. So codependence would be fear and my discomfort with the awareness that I'm gaining. And what is the awareness usually? Losing control. And so that's another one that we want to talk about. And so control, each chakra basically has that construct of complete out of controlness and complete controlness. And so when we're talking psychologically, when we are in fear, when we're in post-traumatic stress, we're in stress that's leading to post-traumatic stress, we're in a level of fear and we're uncomfortable with that fear and we don't know what to do with it. And so that's why in this world of this shamanic world that we bring this balance to psychotherapy and shamanic work. It is dealing with the non-physical world, this world that isn't physical. And so here we go with this physical world where I have a lot of extra awareness that's creating a lot of fear and I'm creating attachment because of that. And now I look to the non-physical world for help, just like we mentioned earlier here. When we go into that place where we're building faith, I ask for help, angels, guides, helpers, anything from this metaphysical, unseen world, but does exist. When I ask for that help, I have less fear because I trust root chakra and have faith, second chakra, and have patience, sixth chakra. And so these are the chakras that essentially are doing that process of creating a self that comes to here. So we'll say come to here, but really coming to here is a combination of all of that chakra work coming into this place where I live just a little bit on either side of this, which creates a nice little chi ball that I can play with and toss back to Julie.
That was beautiful. And,
Goal, and we have to, if we're ending something, we hate each other, or we're really, a lot of people have identified the kind of incongruity in that. Like if you hate somebody, you're still connected, you're still attached, and so that's still attachment. So we'll do clearings in sessions where it'll be 10 relationships ago and it'll be all the chakras will be encompassed with this person because of the attachments.
Yeah.
And so doing this thing, like when I communicated with my teachers, like, what are you cutting in cord cutting? That's a shamanic practice of cord cutting. What are you cutting if everything's interrelated and interconnected? And so this is that understanding of dependence, codependence, independence, interdependence. So when we get to the cutting, we're using that because that's how we understand, right? Humans, right? Polarity thinking, you cut something, you cut it away. But this is what we're doing here, is we're just returning it to integrity and to love. So that whatever that person was needing, and I always think of that in my own personal life too, whatever someone is needing from me, if they're corded into me, it's love. That's what they need. So, it's like I'll just take the cord and hook it to source. Right. So that's just a way of looking at that. But it's like, you need love. I'm going to hook your cord to source. That's going to make my life a lot easier and happier. And you're going to be connected to the thing you were looking for, anyways. Because if you see it in me, that's me. But the only reason it's in me is because that's who I am. I am source as well. Not 100%, 80, as we've talked about, 80% source. And but this is the general idea that we're talking about. If we can disconnect, which is really just connect to source. I'm not disconnecting from the source. I'm disconnecting from the person and connecting back to source. Then there would not be codependence, right? That would just be a stage of development when we're 7 years old. And then all of this that we're talking about with this chakra, basically this patience that we're talking about, is possible because of the lack of fear. As soon as we get back into fear, we're going to get impatient. We're going to start being connected. And that basically is why we called it lust. And so, what are some of the ways, right? So, kind of make that transition into, do you have a piece of amethyst? That's the stone. And it's a very powerful protective stone. I have in several places in my home the Eye of Horus, also a very powerful symbol, right? It's right there above my head, right? So, very powerful symbol and very helpful, right? And so, this is again what we're talking about. There's all kinds of math in that symbol, but what are we talking about? It equals to create protection for the input that's coming in to my energetic system. What do I use for that in an essential oil? Goldenrod. So usually in every session, I will say goldenrod. It's not an easy one to find, even though it's super simple.
Eden's Garden. You taught
Yes,
me that.
absolutely.
And I
So
put it on before the live stream. I put it on almost every day.
I do too. And basically, it's just touching it to the third eye. So you just take that drop, put it on the third eye. Your intention is, here's where we want to create layers of protection, just like I said with the cell when we're talking about cellular structure, layers of protection, right? They're there on purpose. Why are they there? Because we live in polarity. There are evil energetic entities that would prefer that you not succeed. It's a very simple process to say they do exist. Do they exist in anywhere other than my mind? No, because that's the only way I can understand things is through my senses and through this mind of mine. So that's where my beliefs they land in that place. We live in polarity. Ultimate attachment, we could call that evil, right? Ultimate detachment. I don't know that it has a name because we don't focus on that as much, but it isn't helpful, right? It's not neutral, like we said earlier. Neutral is everything. Ultimate detachment is detaching from everything.
Oh yeah, that's a huge distinction.
It definitely is.
So I think we lost a couple of viewers because my internet connection was going in and out. But I wanted to say to anybody who's on here, if you are ever at a point where you and your partner are deciding to part ways, if you both are feeling mature enough and ready, it's a very helpful. I did this in the last relationship that I was in. We both tried to figure out everything we could to make it work. And it was obvious that spirit just wasn't going to support it because he needed to do his thing and I needed to do mine, and our paths weren't really meshing. And so I wanted to do it in a sacred way because we really did make a go of it, and it was obvious that we did love each other. And I didn't want to end it in a sour way. I wanted to end it in a sacred way because it was a sacred relationship. And so I did it with the help of, we did it, all three of us, with the help of Kevin
Yeah.
and Spirit.
Yeah.
And can you explain a little bit what that looks like before we close out?
Sure.
In case
Definitely.
people have interest in that in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just from the very basic standpoint that, again, like you said, maturity. And so that we come into a space together, and that space basically is not about the troubles, the separation, the struggles. It's not about the damage that's been created. It's about moving this consciousness back to love and really using the eyes, right? As we're talking about a third eye, we're talking about these eyes, and these eyes are really critically important to gaining information. And so, using eye gazing as we do to create an intimate connection, we also use it to create an intimate connection to source so that I can see source in another person. So, I really can do that. And that when I see that, I begin to detach from all of the stories, right? So, detaching from the attachment stories. And I begin to enter into love, into the neutrality that is the truth, the only thing that exists. And so, yeah, there are many processes that we walked through in order to do that. But this is what is encouraged, is that when you do this, you can feel truly complete. That there isn't unresolved issues at this point because you've both moved into neutral. And so, yeah, and Julie, you can kind of share just a little bit about, just the sense that you felt when we took this sacred step of, untangling the attachments and bringing that relationship to a close.
That's why I was wanting you to explain the process a little bit, because I kind of forgot, because there's two things we did. One is when we connected through left eye gazing, and we had an infinity symbol running through our hearts. But I think that's when we were still together, and at that point when we were doing that exercise, I could feel all of our past lives together.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely.
But I don't have as much recollection of when we did the it was a ceremony, but what did we call it? Like the dissolution ceremony? I don't remember.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, we'd start that with a
I
burn.
know we did eye gazing again.
We did, and basically that same connectivity, right? So that's, the focal point is when we're connecting with each other, we're using our energy to do that. So we're just moving that energy from heart to heart. This focus of connecting to source, really focusing on what's coming through the crown and in the root into that heart. So I'm pulling that energy in and then sending it, so that I'm doing literally detaching from this because I'm attaching to source. And then that can be completed through what we call a burn, or burn ceremony, which is where we burn the names. And that's another one. Like, we just had a big full moon, and that's usually what I do on a full moon, is I just say, who's in here, who's in my chakras. And this is what the burn ceremony does, is I write these names down and I burn that piece of paper. And what that does is it removes those people from my chakras. It sends their energy back to them. And I think we've talked about doing this and sending energy back as well, similar. And so that kind of completion, where we can do that, we can take that even farther to a burying ceremony. That's a lot of times with actual divorce, where we'll take things that were part of the relationship and put them in a dispatchio, or dispatching. So we dispatch of them by putting them in a red cloth and burying that cloth, or putting it under a rock. And that can complete as well. So there's a lot of different rituals that we can do. Those are kind of the main ones that we do for kind of taking two people and separating them energetically back into individuals.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, wow, Spirit really had a lot of other things, specifically the Sixth Chakra, that we wanted to discuss today. Beautiful.
Absolutely.
I'm going to, after it's recorded, I'll go back and change the description. I'll still say Sixth Chakra, but in the description, I'll let people know what we talked about. So before they press play, they'll be like, what? They're okay, now I'm really going to press play.
All right. Excellent.
That's awesome. Very rich. Yeah.
Always a pleasure.
Love. It's all about love.
It is. It really is. I mean, it seems to be sometimes a cliche. We want to take it out of that cliche, and put it back into, there's only really one truth, and that's this non-dual everything force that we're naming as love here in this session. And that it's an easy way to kind of put that back into this understanding of how planets don't crash into each other, and people can manage non-codependent lives together, because they are understanding that there is this presence that really always exists. There's nothing we can do to affect that as humans. We can detach from it and say it doesn't exist, but we cannot make it not exist.
And that the dual world that we live in is, because the non-dual is all encompassing, you can't really separate them.
That's it. Right? So this is basically where it's good to understand it's not the center of the teeter-totter. It's the thing the teeter-totter exists in. Right? So the center, that center point, is this, what we're talking about here. But the neutral isn't what's the center of that. Or we're in the now, we're out of time and space, because we can't have time and space in a neutral presence. So we leave time and space, our dimensional realities, and move into love.
Awesome.
Ta-da.
Thank you so much. Okay,
Absolutely.
everybody, we sure hope you enjoyed that. Kevin, thank you for giving us your time and energy today and your knowledge and your wisdom and for sharing.
Absolutely.
And
My pleasure.
thank you to the spirits that were in the background.
Absolutely.
And thank you to the audience, those who watched today and those who will watch in the future.
Thank you so much.
Ciao.
All
Love,
right.
everybody. Remember, it's all about love.